Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to the Candidates Forum for the 8th Congressional District. Welcome, Mr. Jordan and Mr. Beyer. We appreciate you taking out the time to answer questions on various issues that have been submitted by our members and other attendees. My name is Anu Sahai, and I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area. We are a 511 member strong organization committed to nonpartisanship. These are challenging times as we are unable to meet in person, but thanks to technology, we can conduct our forum online while staying safe. We're pleased to partner with a number of community and service groups in sponsoring this forum. We are all nonpartisan and non-profit entities. Like the League, our partners are committed to supporting the democratic process by providing these opportunities to meet and question the candidates and compare their responses, and to encouraging community participation. We are grateful to our many volunteers who have worked tirelessly to put together this virtual event. And we particularly thank all of you for attending tonight. This is really what American democracy looks like at its best, an opportunity to ask questions and get answers on all the issues that matter most to us. And most importantly, to do it in a respectful and civil manner. That is why the League of Women Voters was founded 100 years ago. And tonight we join with our partners to continue that tradition of civil discourse. We look forward to a lively and respectful conversation. I will go over the format. All candidates certified to appear on the November 3rd ballot were invited to participate today. These candidates will have 1.5 minutes for an opening statement, 90 seconds to answer each question, and 2 minutes for a closing statement. Each candidate will have the opportunity to answer the same question. After the first question, I will rotate the order in which the candidates give 90-second answers to your questions. Our timekeeper, Nicole, will provide 30-second, 15-second, and stop alerts. We will follow the timing rules strictly. This event is being recorded, and we will have the video up on the League of Women Voters YouTube channel. After the forum, the candidates will be sent a list of questions that were asked, but we were unable to ask, and we will send them over to the candidates, and they may post answers to them on their website. So let's get started. Mr. Beyer, would you like to make an opening statement?
Yes, Anu, thank you very much. And I'm thrilled to be invited back for this time-honored debate. I've been part of League of Women Voters debates for 30 years. I love the League and your commitment to voter education, to voter engagement. I deeply believe that our democracy works best when the most people vote and participate. And you're very much part of that for a long, long time. So thank you. And it's been an extraordinary honor to serve as the member of Congress from the 8th District of Virginia for the last 6 years. I've had many leadership roles in my life, but none have been as fulfilling and as meaningful as this job in Congress. The chance to be a change agent each and every day. I try to express my values in everything that I do: integrity, courage, compassion, humility, and a deep belief that we can make America and the world ever better, towards a more perfect union. I have a huge legislative portfolio. I try not to run through it because it bores people to death, but I have the most wonderful staff on Capitol Hill. And I've paid the most attention, number one, to fighting climate change. I am the vice chair of the New Democratic Coalition's Climate Change Task Force. Many of the climate change initiatives I've done have been blended into the House versions that we're doing. Number two has been leading the fight against the way the coronavirus has affected the most vulnerable of our people. I've been, I think, fairly safe to say that the leading champion for unemployment insurance. Now it looks like the stop sign is up, so I will stop, but thank you.
Oops. Mr. Jordan, would you like to make an opening statement?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Jeff Jordan, Republican nominee for U.S. Congress here in Virginia's 8th District. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for the invitation to be here today, and for Dawn being here as well. Since it was founded, America has been a beacon of hope and opportunity for people around the world. It offers the promise of a better life and a life well lived. The standard of living that we enjoy here is the greatest the world's ever known. But at the heart of it all is a social contract that says if you go to school, go to work, pay your bills, earn an honest living, then you can enjoy the fruits of your labor and make your own American dream a reality. It's up to you. It's individual responsibility. But in case you haven't noticed, this country's under attack, not just by outside forces, but by people within our own government. And you know some of them by name. Ilhan Omar, who said some people did something on 9/11. AOC, who supports the Green New Deal that destroyed the Venezuelan economy. Rashid Tlaib, who has family members on terror watch lists. They're all more liberal and radical than Pelosi. But you know who else is? My opponent. He'll deny that he's a socialist by highlighting his business history, but make no mistake, that's where he is. Thank you. You're still muted.
Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. Won't happen again. So the first question is for you, Mr. Beyer. What, in your opinion, are the three most important challenges facing our country, and how do you propose to address them?
Well, thank you, Anu. But number one, by far, is the existential challenge of climate change. You know, we see it in our lives today with the huge wildfires in California. 3 of the worst fires ever are going on right now, and the hurricanes. But if you look at what's happening in the Antarctic, where the 2 major ice sheets could have the potential to raise sea levels by 8 feet, or in the Arctic today, the warmest it's ever been. This is the thing that doesn't seem to affect us today, but the best leaders think long-term. The second big thing is income inequality and wealth inequality. My opponent talked about the American social contract. What doesn't work for many tens of millions of Americans. 40 million Americans worked full-time last year and made less than $18,000 a year. We have some whopping percentage of our children living in poverty. And the third big thing, I think, especially relevant this year, is dealing with the systemic racism that has kept so many of American people down. This is 400 years. It's the original sin of America. And we can do much to overcome it, beginning with criminal justice reform, beginning with trying to figure out how do we lift up every American, and how do we address the subtle, often not mean, but very real systemic racism that is built into the entitlement that older white men like Jeff and I have been privileged to enjoy.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, I'll repeat the question for you. What, in your opinion, are the 3 most important challenges facing our country, and how do you propose to address them?
Well, we have a lot of challenges right now, and I think the most important one is the internal one, the existential threat to our country, and that's socialism. Everything that we have, that we own, that we use on a day-to-day basis, none of it was made by socialism. You know, and if you, I'll speak to the climate change. Let's go to climate change. To me, that's not an issue, at least not one that can't be fixed. I mean, it's well known that my opponent, he's been a car salesman for half a century. He's been a multimillionaire by selling combustion engine vehicles. He's dedicated his professional career to a product that's been one of the largest contributors to what he now calls the most significant and intractable problem we face, the problem of climate change. He's now attempting to sell you a solution to a problem that he not only helped to create, but also from which he still profits. So, you know, speaking of profits, Don, you know, will you help solve the most significant and intractable problem facing us today by redistributing your wealth you've accumulated by contributing so much to climate change?
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. So both of you brought up several issues that you think are the most important ones to you. Do you think there are any opportunities for Democrats and Republicans to find common ground on any of them? Mr. Jordan, would you like to answer that?
Well, I absolutely think that there's plenty of room for Republicans and Democrats to work together. The problem is we have socialists and profiteers in the way. People that don't want to solve the problems, people that want to make the problems harder, more difficult to solve. And unfortunately, many of those people are in positions of power. And there are additionally people in power, even if they aren't part of that group, aren't able or willing to challenge those people. They aren't willing to put forth the effort or take the risk personally, professionally, economically in order to do those things. Those are the right things to do. Stand up to the socialists and the profiteers who are making it so difficult to solve the problems.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, would you like to talk about it? Do you think there is any opportunity for Democrats and Republicans to find some common ground on any of these issues?
Sure, absolutely, Anu. And the press doesn't tend to focus on the things we do together. For example, we had a huge bipartisan majority last night to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government open. But here's some quick examples. I've been leading the fight on carbon pricing, which is the single most important thing we can do to let the markets work to address climate change. And I've been doing it with Republican Francis Rooney, who's a member of Congress from Florida. With Tom Emmer, a Republican from Minnesota, he and I have been working in the Cuba Working Group for the last 6 years. With Vern Buchanan, a Republican from Florida, he and I co-sponsored the Wildlife Corridors Act, which passed again this summer. And then just yesterday, working for years with John Katko, a Republican, and Greg Gianforte, a Republican, we passed 2 really important suicide prevention bills. So there's a lot we can do together. There are some things, guns, abortion, that are very difficult to find common ground, but most of the things we can do together.
Thank you. Our next question is a hot button topic, so let's get to it right away. How can government best address racial inequality and the systemic racism in our society? That's for you, Mr. Beyer.
Well, the very first thing we can do is have leaders who will acknowledge that it is a problem and who want to bring us together. The challenge with Donald Trump, as his Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, said, he's the first president in history intent to divide us rather than unite us. There's a very sad piece in the Washington Post today that goes on for thousands of words about Trump's racism, anti-Semitism, and on and on and on. And of course, we have people like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and other pretty clear racists in the White House right now. So we start with leadership, but then we also look at renewing the Voting Rights Act, which of course was thrown out with a crazy decision some years ago when the Chief Justice said that racism is no longer an issue in America. We passed H.R. 4 earlier this year, named after the wonderful late John Lewis, that would restore the Voting Rights Act. But then there's lots and lots of little things. Donald Trump recently got rid of the rules that tried to make it possible for neighborhoods to integrate, saying he was going to keep our white suburbs white to make sure that our white neighbors felt safe, which is exactly the wrong thing to do. We need to make sure that one of the reasons that so many Black families have 1/10 the average net worth of a white family is because through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, they were excluded from neighborhoods where they're able to buy homes and build value.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, how can government best address racial inequality and the systemic racism in our society?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to happen is stop voting Democrat. Look at all of the problems that we have in this country, whether it's policing issues, poverty, homelessness, fatherless homes, any place where there is any kind of inequality that can be tied to race, or any problem that can be tied to race. All of the major cities, all run by Democrats for decades. But let's look at history a little bit, okay? Let's compare Republicans and Democrats. Since the Dred Scott decision, which said Blacks aren't citizens, okay? That was opposed by Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, but it was supported by Jefferson Davis, who was a Democrat, okay? Then you have Jim Crow laws, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, the amendments were 100% or almost 100% supported by Republicans and almost unanimously opposed by Democrats. the 94 crime bill, opposed by Republicans, put forth by the now nominee for president on the Democrat ticket, Joe Biden. So at the end of the day, stop voting Democrat. The policies are bad.
Thank you. This question goes to you, Mr. Jordan.
Yep.
What is your position on increasing the federal minimum wage?
Well, I think that, look, let the market economy work. Do we need to have jobs that pay well? Yes, we do. But are service industry jobs, the low-level jobs, are those meant to be career jobs? No, they were never meant to be that. Okay? A lot of people that are working there, they don't have the skills. So let's give them the skills. Let's put money into skill development. Let's get them the jobs so that they can afford the housing. Let's get them the jobs so that they can afford the health care. And that's what President Trump has done. That's why you see record numbers of employment in the Black community, Hispanic community, across the board. Trump is doing for the economy across the board, regardless of race. And to call him a racist, he won awards from the NAACP for his work. You can't call him a racist, right?
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, what is your position on increasing the federal minimum wage?
The federal minimum wage desperately needs to be raised. If it had just kept up with inflation from what it was when I got my first job, 1966 at $1.25 an hour, it'd be over $12 right now instead of $7.25. It is immoral, it's completely immoral, that a person can work full-time, 40 hours a week, year-round, and not even be at the poverty level. This is not an American social contract that works. And sure, it'd be great if everybody moved up, but lots of people don't move up because we have a significant category of people who never finished high school or only finished high school. We keep saying, I mean, the Republican friends tell me that if the minimum wage is raised, that people lose their jobs. Well, we've raised it again and again and again over the last 50 years, and we continue to create ever more jobs. By the way, what the coronavirus has shown us too is that the unemployment rate for African Americans has soared because they're the ones at the low end with the minimum wage jobs. We were the first ones to lose their jobs in this coronavirus pandemic. My friend Jeff talks about how the history of the Democrats going back to the 1800s was not very good, and I agree, and I admire Abraham Lincoln. But let's face it, the modern Republican Party is based on Richard Nixon's Southern strategy that Donald Trump has doubled down on. It is the appeal to white and unfortunately some racist or unconsciously racist voters to maintain their power.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Beyer, this next question will start with you. According to several polls, and pardon me, it's a longish question. According to several polls, including Quinnipiac, Pew Research, and Gallup, a vast majority of Americans support universal background checks, red flag laws, and licenses for gun ownership. What is your view on these measures?
Thank you. I heartily support them. I've been leading the fight on red flag laws for about 4 years now, and I'm thrilled that Virginia passed one this last session. And we just got data for the first time this week about people whose lives have been saved in Virginia because someone reported a family member in a psychotic crisis and was able to take their guns away before they killed themselves or before they killed others. Universal background checks makes enormous sense. Virginia was one of the very first states to have background checks at actual gun stores, but we need it for private sales and we need it for gun shows, closing the so-called loophole. We don't want to take guns away from every law-abiding citizen. That's a fiction, that's a red herring. We just want to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and the dangerously mentally ill. And that's what red flag laws do, and that's what universal background checks do.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Jordan, I'll repeat the question for you. According to several polls, including Quinnipiac, Pew Research, and Gallup, a vast majority of Americans support universal background checks, red flag laws, and licenses for gun ownership. What is your view on these measures?
Well, I think keeping hands out of the guns of criminals isn't working now. So how do you expect more laws to make that work? Look, Don, you say 100 people a day die in the U.S. by gunshot, and then it's a tragedy that requires our leaders to act. Okay. From a moral standpoint, you're endorsed by an organization that kills 1,000 babies a day. And that's a tragedy that requires our representatives to act, because we have to make a distinction that we are representatives, not leaders. Okay. So let's make that clear. Every day, more Americans die in Democrat-controlled jurisdictions by guns or forceps than anywhere else in the world. Okay. They have the strictest gun laws and the least strict abortion laws. So tell me how government is going to solve this problem. And let's not to mention that all of these things that are being asked about, they're unconstitutional. So I believe in improving our mental health capacity in this country, all the way through, school age, all the way to at least high school level. Let's enable our young people to grow up with a solid mental state instead of just feeling good about themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. And this question, I'll start with you. What, in your opinion, is the best way we can balance public health with the economic needs in this country, especially in light of COVID?
Well, I think COVID's shown us a lot of things that we need to look at. I would propose a COVID-19 commission, similar to the 9/11 commission, that looks at what we did right and what we did wrong across this country, and establish a framework that will protect public health and public safety and civil liberties all at the same time. Because right now we have such great disparity from one state to the next. And let's remember, all the states have their own authorities to do a lot of the things to address and mitigate the problem. It's not all a federal issue. So you can't blame all this on Trump. The states have to be responsible, but it has to be an equitable, even distribution of policy implementation across the board as you move through a pandemic, because the pandemic's hard enough to get through itself. Let's not add all this contention and challenge and difficulty along the way. We need to do better. We need to pull together. We need to move forward together. But in order to do that, we have to have a plan that's consistent and fair for everybody.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question for you, Mr. Beyer. What, in your opinion, is the best way we can balance public health with the economic needs in this country, especially in light of COVID?
Well, I agree with Jeff that the first thing we need is a plan. And that's what's been missing since the very beginning. We've had a president who said it was a hoax, that we're going to magically disappear. You should take drink some bleach and it'll go away, or take hydroxychloroquine, which probably makes it worse. So number one, we need universal mask wearing. I live in Alexandria, which will have mask wearing in public places and on the street starting October 1st. All the epidemiologists are saying that's the single best thing we can do. Number two is we need to make sure that these 8 vaccines that are coming are safe. We don't want them rushed in order to affect an election, but we do want them as soon as they can be safely verified. And number three, we need to take care of all the people that are hurting. We have 30 million people unemployed right now. We have 400,000 of the 500,000 restaurants that could close by the year end. We definitely need to renew that HEROES or that CARES package we did back in March that Democrats have pushed again and again and again with no progress whatsoever. Our jurisdiction in Northern Virginia, Arlington, Alexandria, Falls Church, Fairfax, have all had hundreds of millions of dollars in shortfalls in revenue because people aren't going to restaurants, they aren't buying stuff. That's going to affect our police, our teachers, our firefighters, our child protective service workers, even our trash pickup. We need to help the people that are really hurting right now.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, this question is for you. Do you support removing the ratification deadline for the Equal Rights Amendment? Why or why not?
That's a tricky question. In the short run, I do not support removing ratification deadline because I think it's irrelevant. There's nothing in the Constitution that talks about ratification deadlines. My position, and I'm not a lawyer, is that when Virginia ratified the Equal Rights Amendment this last year, it is the law, it is the Constitution, and it's what we have right now. Now, I know there are people that will challenge that and probably will go to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court disagrees with me, and the Supreme Court, and says that that ratification was constitutional, then yes, absolutely, we should get rid of the ratification, and I will support that legislation. You know, it's so silly. All those arguments that were made by Phyllis Schlafly and the like 40 years ago about why this is a bad idea have turned out to be moot. As my pal Jeff knows, women serve in the military, they're in combat positions, they are brave, they are capable. My recently departed chief of staff was an Army lieutenant colonel who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and Guantanamo. And I also see, as the father of 3 daughters, how incredibly capable they are. I can't imagine that they would ever have any diminished right compared to a man in this country.
Thank you. This question is for you too, Mr. Jordan, and I'll repeat it for you. Do you support removing the ratification deadline for the Equal Rights Amendment? Why or why not?
No, I mean, the deadline was set, it was part of the law, follow the law. This is the rule of law. Secondly, the country today is far different than it was then. If we're going to implement something of that magnitude, then let's sit down at this time with the people that are here now and renegotiate or reevaluate the components of the act and see what we need to address and change. I have 2 young daughters, so I'm all about teaching them to be strong, independent young women. So make no mistake, I want them to have the same opportunities that I've had growing up, to have the same opportunity to get paid the same, right? There isn't anything that a woman or that a woman should do or can do that should be any different from a man in terms of getting paid the same, having the same respect, and being able to have a career and a job and move forward. So, but no, I would not support an extension or an elimination of the deadline.
Thank you. This next question is on immigration, and it's for you, Mr. Jordan. Do you expect a comprehensive immigration reform bill in the next 4 years? And if so, what are the most important provisions you would include in it?
Well, I think once the Republicans take the House and keep the Senate and get reelected to the presidency, I think we'll have a strong case to move forward with an immigration plan that works for everybody, to include all of those people that come here legally. I've met countless individuals that have come up to me and said, thank you for running. The illegal immigration problem has to be fixed. And these are people that have come here legally. So to be able to protect the country, allow people in legally, and do so in a way that does not exploit people of any kind on either side of the border is the key. And I know that one of the things that often comes up in these conversations is the cages, okay? Let's not forget that the cages were authorized, appropriated, and built under President Obama. And they're not really cages, it's just a chain link fence that goes from floor to ceiling. And that most of the kids that are separated, they're separated for their safety because they don't come with family members, and they're likely to be exploited by sex trafficking. So, you know, what would you rather have? That they be safe or they fall prey to sex traffickers?
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, I'll repeat the question for you. Do you expect a comprehensive immigration reform bill in the next 4 years? And if so, what are the most important provisions you would include in it?
Well, if Jeff is right and the Republicans keep the Senate, I don't expect a comprehensive reform bill. And if Donald Trump is still president, I don't expect it either. The Republican Party is based right now on the hatred of people that don't look like them, the hatred of the other. Let's just say, if Jeff somehow wins this, I want to wake you up to the fact that there are 10,000 DACA kids living in the 8th District who are going to be looking to you for leadership. These are children who are brought here as infants, 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, who are as American as your daughters and as my daughters. And they're going to high school here, and they're going to George Mason and Nova and Marymount, and they are wonderful children. And the very first thing I do is make sure that there's a path to citizenship for our DACA kids. The second thing I do is I'd separate those children. Get rid of this myth that they're Obama. There were no children caged under Barack Obama. I visited with the kids that were separated from their fathers, and I visited with the parents who were separated from their kids. They are brokenhearted. We also have done a terrible job at refugees. We shrunk our refugee population to the lowest it's been in our lifetimes. By the way, our American birth rate is the lowest it's been in our lifetimes again. The only reason we have a chance to have a growing economy is because of immigrants. Yes, we want legal immigrants, but we need to take care of the people that are already here too. And we need to do it with some compassion. The family business that I have been part of for many years, 2/3 were born overseas. Most of them didn't come illegally, but some of them did, and were part of the Reagan amnesty, and they've made an enormous contribution to our country.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next question is for Mr. Jordan, and it is kind of related to COVID also, but what is your opinion on universal childcare to level the playing field for working families and women, especially nowadays that children are at home being homeschooled or attending classes at home? What can the government do to help those parents?
Is that to me first or Don?
It's to Mr. Beyer first.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks for Jeff for clarifying that. I serve as the vice chair of the Joint Economic Committee, and just last week we put out a major report, I think 40 pages, on childcare crisis in America, and it is a crisis. Right now, 50% of American children live in childcare deserts. That is to say, there's no available childcare there. That's available, not even affordable. Most families are paying between 1/4 and 3/4 of their take-home income on childcare if they have a child under the age of 5. People are spending more on childcare under the age of 5 than they are on their rent or mortgage, and more than they would pay if they sent their child to a state university. But at the same time, with coronavirus, people have been so reluctant. 370,000 childcare workers have lost their jobs this year. The industry is in really, really tough shape. I think this is one of the most major problems we have, because childcare is essentially what's holding back the American economy. There's a really interesting economic work by Emmy Nakamura at Berkeley that shows that the reason for the stagnant economic growth in the last 20 years is women are not entering the labor force at the same rate they were before. And the primary reason they're not entering is because they can't afford the child care. So I'm very much for a much more robust government investment in childcare that will allow our economy to grow much more quickly and put our women into our workforce where they can make a huge contribution.
Thank you. This question is, and now it's your turn, Mr. Jordan. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, that's fine. I appreciate it though. Look, it's all about economics, right? So let's get people to work and let's cut taxes. Why does everything have to result in a government program? Why does everything have to result in more taxes? If early 1900s, you could live on a single income with a family of 8. You can't do that anymore. Why? Because you're taxed to death. Every time you turn around, income tax, sales tax, inheritance tax, gas tax, you name it, it's taxed. And Joe Biden wants to add more taxes, 3% on your house. That, you want to talk about killing the American dream, start taxing houses at 3%. And let's go back to the minimum wage. Okay, Don, you said it's immoral that we haven't raised the minimum wage. Isn't it equally immoral that we keep taxing Social Security benefits? Is it immoral that we keep moving Social Security dollars away and reducing the return on investment on those Social Security dollars to the beneficiaries? Look, get the government out of my pocket. Get them out of your pocket. That's the best way to move forward and make everybody, put everybody in a better place, financially, economically, across the board. Then maybe we can afford healthcare or childcare.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, would you like to answer the question? Should I repeat the question for you?
I knew I actually started with it.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
I think it's Jeff's turn.
Okay. So I'm so sorry. This question is about climate change. Considering Virginia's location and dependency on its coast and tributaries for commerce, tourism, and defense, what measures do you support to protect our assets?
Can you repeat that? That wasn't a really clear.
Okay.
Anyway.
Considering Virginia's location and dependency on its coast and tributaries for commerce, tourism, and defense, what measures do you support to protect our assets? It's about climate change and rising water levels.
Well, okay, if we're going to talk about rising water levels, why hasn't the insurance industry, who insures homes and businesses and facilities along coastlines, why have they not raised their insurance prices? Why do they keep underwriting all of that at the shoreline? If there's a crisis, they wouldn't do it because they would lose money, huge money. So that's the key indicator that you have to look for when you start talking about rising sea levels, is the economics. That's the economic edge of climate change, or one of them, when you start talking about rising water. So the idea that we are in a crisis at this point, in terms of climate, no. I mean, the media is going to sell you. They're selling you right now that we're facing a climate apocalypse. That the forests are burning and you can't see anything out west, and it's all due to climate change. Well, why aren't Canada and Mexico burning at the same rate? Why isn't any other forest in the world burning at the same rate? It's because the military arm of the Democratic Party, otherwise known as Antifa and BLM, are burning down the forest just like they're burning down our cities.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Beyer, would you like to answer the question? Would you like me to repeat it?
I'm stunned by the ridiculousness of the military arm of the Democratic Party. That's to be fair, I want to try to be polite. That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. In any case, back to 1900s when 8 children could be raised on a family. Let's also remember the average lifespan of an American male was 40. An American white woman was 42. Of a black man, it was 30. A black woman was 32. That high childhood death rates, that dirt roads everywhere. I don't think any of us want to go back to 1900. And usually when the Republicans cut taxes 2 years ago, $2 trillion, 85% of it went to the top 1%. All those people were trying to lift out of poverty, they got none of it. So I actually feel optimistic anew about Virginia. We are the first state that's trying to do offshore wind off the Atlantic coast. We have major battery farms going on, major solar cells, some of the biggest farms in the country. Long-term thinking. It's easy to ignore climate change if you are just looking at the weather this afternoon, which is beautiful. But the best leaders, including the best military leaders, are the ones who think 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, who don't stick their head in the sand. And I think we need the kind of leaders who will re-engage with Paris, that will put the kind of strong climate change plans. We're the only country in the world that has any climate change deniers. And it seems to be caught up in this, the same thing that thinks that the Democratic Party has a military arm.
Thank you. Our next question is for you, Mr. Beyer. So we have a number of federally funded and administered programs in our country, like Social Security, Medicare, public schools, parks, and libraries, not to mention our huge infrastructure of highways and waterways. Do you think these programs should be expanded, reduced, or left as is?
I think they have to constantly be re-examined. On Social Security, I am very much in favor of the Social Security 2100 bill. I'm a co-sponsor of. John Larson from Connecticut has been pushing it for years. That would raise the Social Security payout for people at the bottom. Because if you worked your whole life at a minimum wage, you don't get nearly enough to live on when you hit 65 or 70. But at the same time, it would slowly increase the Social Security deduction by 0.1%, no, 0.8% per year for the next 25 years. That then makes it valid through the end of this century. You talk to my millennial children, none of them think that Social Security will be there for them. That's pretty much across the board. So we need to save that. On Medicare and Medicaid, we need to continue to look at ways where we can cut the growth in the cost of healthcare, because that's what's pushing those up. Those are so-called automatic expenditures. As they grow, and it would be great to be able to slow them down. But what we don't want to do is slow them down by saying, you're old, we're cutting you off, or here state, here is a certain amount of money and we're not going to let it grow, despite the fact that the cost of healthcare may grow a lot faster than, say, the population does. So things like medical records. I was on a conference call earlier today that they said that can save tons of money if you're able to do that. Or a simple medical ID number for every American could save up to 10,000 lives per year. That saves a lot of money.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, would you like me to repeat the question for you?
Please.
We have a number of federally funded and administered programs in our country, like Social Security, Medicare, public schools, parks and libraries, not to mention our huge infrastructure of highways and waterways. Should they be expanded, reduced, or left as is?
Well, I think when you look at infrastructure, obviously that has to be maintained, and we're behind on that. So I'm all for supporting at least the maintenance of that. When it comes to other programs, Social Security, let's refill the coffers that Congress has taken away and give the beneficiaries their money back. Let's start with that. And the idea that, you know, we need to give more to less fortunate people. Look, it's not the government's place to tell me or you to give my money or your money to somebody else. That's our business, okay? Americans are the most generous people in the world. And we will do the right thing. But to say, you know, we have to give more to those who don't make enough. Okay, that's their incentive in this country to be better, do better for themselves, get help, reach out, strive, climb. I mean, that's what you do in this country. America isn't about, you know, making you and I mediocre. It's about making us great, making us the best that we can be. That's the goal. So let's stop being mediocre and striving for mediocre and giving handouts. Let's enable people to do for themselves what they want to do and achieve their dreams.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. This next question, I'll start with you, Mr. Jordan. What steps will you take to increase voter participation and access to voting?
Well, I don't know that we have a problem with access. I think we're going to see a record turnout this year, at least based on the numbers I'm seeing. When it comes to voting, I think what we need to do is institute some things like mandatory voter ID. Let's get rid of the electronic voting machines, because those have significant problems and vulnerabilities. Let's go straight to paper ballots. Let's go to indelible ink. Let's make sure that the most important thing that we do in this country from a civic perspective, which is voting, is protected for everybody. And then it's one vote, one count. No other way. No ranked choice voting, no jungle primaries, none of that. One person, one vote, count it, secure it, and make sure that the integrity of the vote is valid. Because everything else that we do in this country, whether it's taxes, anything related to government, stems from that one point. It is that critical. It is foundational to this country.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, what steps will you take to increase voter participation and access to voting?
Well, one of the things I think we first need to do is recognize that, sadly, tragically, the modern Republican Party is based on suppressing the vote in any way they possibly can. When the Supreme Court threw out the Voting Rights Act, it basically took off the fetters of so many states who were then able to put in the most stringent voter suppression efforts that they could, including lots and lots of ID requirements that you saw across the board were pushing down voter participation. So we need to reenact the Voting Rights Act with the John Lewis bill. Jeff's right about paper ballots, but we've already gone that to Virginia a number of years ago. It's a really good thing. We need to keep the Postal Service strong. What we've done in recent days with cutting overtime and increasing the time of delivery for Postal Service is a terrible thing to do in a year when we have a coronavirus pandemic and more people are voting by mail than ever before. I'm a big fan of voting by mail because it enables letting more people to be part of it. You know, Jeff may not realize this, but you were born in Virginia, realize that the Bird machine ran in Virginia for 50 years, and it was based on 10% voter turnout, older white men that own property. As long as we kept women and we keep people of color from voting, we can maintain power. I'm in the opposite position. Our democracy is strongest when everybody has the right to participate and to vote.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And this question will start with you, Mr. Beyer. Political parties have become very polarized over the last few years, and there seems to be a feeling among many people that they do not know whom to trust. Do you think trust can be restored in our democracy, and if so, how?
Thanks, Anu. That's a really difficult issue that we struggle with because it is far more polarized than it's been, and it is a sad thing. For the last 6 years, I've been leading the way on something called the Voter Representation Act, the Fair Representation Act. It's HR 4000 if you want to look it up. That would actually do ranked choice voting. I know my pal doesn't like that, but it's the fairest way by far to make sure that the will of the majority prevails. And multi-member districts, because when you have single-member districts, when it's Don Beyer against Jeff Jordan or Jennifer Wexton against whomever, inevitably the Republicans are under the right to get the nomination, the Democrats are going to run the left to get the nomination. When you have to appeal to the people in the middle with multi-member districts and ranked choice voting, you're much more likely to get collaboration and people that are running for the middle. I used to say that there was an overlap between liberal Republicans and conservative Democrats. There's no overlap right now. We are so polarized. And I think the Fair Representation Act is the most structurally intelligent way to move forward to do that. But also another big thing is getting political leaders who are interested in crossing the boundary. I came to office saying every single bill that I do, I'm going to try to do with the Republican as a co-sponsor if I can. There have been a couple occasions where that hasn't been possible. Mostly it has. And that's why one of these things, so many of these bills have gotten passed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Jordan, the same question for you. I'll repeat it since it was a long one. Political parties have become very polarized over the last few years, and there seems to be a feeling among many people that they do not know whom to trust. Can trust be restored, and if so, how?
Well, I think it starts with what are you trusting in? Are you trusting the people, or are you trusting what they're there to do and what they're there to support? And when I say that, I mean trust in the Constitution. It is there for everybody. It is the same for everybody. And then you find people who are willing to support and defend it and not undermine it. And the idea that you know we have to succumb to the majority. No, this is not a mob rule. This is a republic. This is representative government. So, you know, the idea that the majority should always win, right? The mob should always win. We see it being manifested now. The realities around this country, cities burning down, the fires being started by arsonists. It just the rhetoric, the hate, the killing babies on the table, right? At what point do we realize that the Constitution is here for everybody? that the Declaration of Independence was written for everybody. You know, it starts with life, right? The first inalienable right. The Democratic Party can't even respect that. So why should we trust them with anything else if we can't trust them with life?
Thank you. This next question will start with you, Mr. Jordan. Do you support additional funding to states and localities for COVID testing?
If they have not prioritized, if states have not prioritized COVID testing at the top of their budgets right now, I would question the leadership of those states. Now, but that's not to say that I wouldn't deny them funds for testing. But I think before we do that, let's make sure we have tests that can do the job. I've seen mixed reporting on the accuracy of testing, to include people that get tested and are negative, but then come out positive, or they test positive and are actually negative, or tests that go in that were never used that are test positive, or tests that can't differentiate between the COVID-19 coronavirus and the common flu coronavirus. So you don't know if you have the common cold or COVID-19. I still have doubts about the validity, the accuracy of many of the tests. So before we go handing out a lot of money to states to do that, I would first want to ensure that the testing is accurate.
Mr. Beyer, the same question for you.
Let me start with my friend and opponent talked about how Democrats don't care about life and the Constitution. Well, let me just point out, you know, I very much respect people's religious beliefs on when a human life begins and when it needs to be protected. But there's nothing in the Constitution that says that a human life is present when there's a two-cell zygote. You know, the Supreme Court has ruled on this in Roe v. Wade, and this is something that we respect and that we obey. I tend to see my friends on the other side as believing that life begins at conception and ends at birth. You don't want to take care of the kids that are living in poverty. You don't want to take care, make sure that their families have the resources that they need so that these children can grow up to have some kind of actual lives, have some promise, have some ability to compete. Again, it's a little silly to say, have states prioritize this in their budgets. Of course they have. But these are the same states that are hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars short because of the impact, the economic impact, the coronavirus. Prioritizing what? You know, this is one of the big differences. The Republican House, Senate had 15 billion. The Democratic House had 75 billion. It's not just to give money to states to buy tests. It's also to develop those tests so that they can be ever more reliable. They can be fast. They can be done without PPE. They can be done in the home or in the workplace. It's an essential part of getting control of this virus. And until we do, the economy is never coming back.
Thank you. This question is also related to COVID. I guess a lot of people are worried about it. What are your plans to aid economic recovery for the families and businesses hardest hit by the COVID crisis? Mr. Beyer, we'll start with you.
Well, on May 15th, we passed the HEROES Act. It was $3.5 trillion, but it extended the Paycheck Protection Program for all those businesses that many of which have already failed, many of which are going to fail in the next couple of months. It would extend money for unemployment insurance. We had a $600 a week bump through the end of July. And that meant that people in the lower quartile were able to continue to buy groceries and gasoline and put food on the table, take care of their kids. That's gone away. Many of them are at the end of the 26 weeks of unemployment insurance, the base that you get from the state, which is usually $200 to $275, not a lot per week. So we would like to put all that in place. We need to get money to state and local governments so that Arlington, Alexandria Falls, Church, Fairfax can provide the essential services that we need. And we need to get money to the schools. We all want our kids back in school, but we want them back in school safely. And that means making sure that they have the masks, the testing, the cleanliness stuff that they actually need. And we have very good bills, and we hope still, it may be a vain hope, but we hope between now and when we break for the elections that we're able to work a deal with the White House, with Mark Meadows, with the Senate, and get a lot of this relief to the people that so desperately need it.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, the same question for you. What are your plans to aid economic recovery for the families and firms hardest hit by the COVID crisis?
Well, I think for businesses, especially, we need to allow them to operate, make sure they're open, maximum safe capacity, and from a tax perspective, because again, that's really the ankle biter every time you turn around is the taxes. Let's give them a tax break. For every 1 month that they were mandated to be closed, give them 1 year tax break. Because it's going to take them a long time to recover. Some of them will never recover. Some of them are already closed. Some people have completely lost their livelihoods. I think secondly, the next biggest thing we can do is open schools. Because people have to work and they need to be able to go to work. And opening the schools is huge. So not to mention the fact our children are suffering academically, socially, intellectually, across the board. Our teachers, they're in the same boat. They're suffering too. They've spent their careers learning how to teach in a classroom, and now they're Zoom monitors, right? We need our communities to be healthy and vibrant, and getting students and teachers back in schools is the best way to do that.
Thank you. We'll start with you with this next question. If you are chosen to represent the 8th District of Congress, what would be your response to all of the violent protests around the country?
You have to hold people accountable, and you have to, and not just the people that are committing the violence, but the people that are funding it, and the elected officials that are out there supporting it. The mayor in Portland out there supporting the riots in his own city. At what point does any elected official think that it's right to destroy public property or private property or hurt people? That is wrong on every level. Don't ever do that. We are supposed to represent the people. And if you are out there advocating and supporting violence, you are wrong. You need to be held accountable first. You need to be made the example. And whether that's the riots and everything that's going on now, or whether it's sanctuary cities that violated federal law, look, if you are an elected official or appointed official in this country and you have violated federal law, for example, sanctuary cities, elected officials that have enabled that need to be held as accessories for every criminal act by every illegal alien in that sanctuary city, period. So it doesn't matter how the violence or no.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, the same question for you. If you're chosen to represent...
I wonder, I have it on you. I wonder that same standard should be held for the white supremacists in the White House, the Steve Bannons and the Steve Millers and the Donald Trumps, with all the, when the FBI said that 2/3 of the terrorist stuff in America is coming out from domestic white supremacist terrorism. So I agree with Jeff completely that we need to hold the people that do violence in any of these protests responsible, whether they come from the right, as many of them do, or from the left, as some of them do. Let's also remember, though, that the vast majority, way more than 97% of the people that have shown up in cities across this country have done so peacefully, as they've done in Alexandria, and Arlington, and Falls Church, in Washington, D.C. There are no sanctuary cities in Virginia, by the way. So yes, people break the law. They need to be held responsible. They need to go to court. They need to go to prison. But let's make sure that the blame is spread equally. Oregon or Portland is a pretty sad place because there seem to be people from both the far right and the far left who intend to come down there and fight each other every night. I'm so glad we don't have that in Virginia. I'm so glad we rarely have that in this part of the United States. But you do right. We do have to hold people responsible. And we need to continue to do like the wonderful Women's March they had the day after Trump's inauguration. 2 million people, not a single arrest. That's the model because the First Amendment guarantees us that right to free speech, to free protest. That's what makes our country so wonderful.
Thank you. This next question, Mr. Beyer. What can you do at your level to strengthen separation of powers so that the checks and balances are effective?
I'm not sure what I can do at my level. Be the best congressman that I can be. It's a struggle right now because we have seen through Democratic and Republican presidents over the last 30 years of our lives, this increasing concentration of power in the executive branch, in the president. As a member of Congress, I guess I'm particularly sensitive to the fact that I think the balance should be more with Congress rather than the president. Let me give you a great example. Donald Trump's been able to do many things by executive action that we think require congressional approval. When Barack Obama was president, my friends on the other side, there were many things he did that they thought should have had congressional approval. The most obvious one is the ability to declare war or commit troops. Jeff served in the military for a long, long time. I'm sure he would appreciate that we shouldn't have one person, one man deciding when we go to war, rather than obeying the Constitution, which says that Congress has the right and the power to declare war. We've had a long fight over the authorization to use military force. Tim Kaine, a Virginia senator, has led that fight for years. Congress this last session finally approved a new authorization for the use of military force. Sadly, it has gone nowhere in the Senate. It actually did come out of the Senate, but got vetoed by the president. We were unable to override the veto. But we will, I'm hoping if Joe Biden's elected president, that he will have been a senator long enough to realize that there should be a more appropriate balance.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, what can you do at your level to strengthen separation of powers so that the checks and balances are effective?
Well, the presidency has gained more power over the last couple of decades. But we have to ask the question, why? Well, that's because Congress has continued to fail year after year after year after year. Congress as a whole does not do what it needs to do in the way it needs to do it in order to prevent things from getting done, the important things from getting done. If we as a Congress want to balance things out, then let's start doing our job. Let's start passing budgets, not continuing resolutions, not stopgap measures, not pieces and parts. Get the job done. Sit down and work it out. And don't spend more than you take in. Okay? The debt's ballooning, and that's on both sides. I'm not blaming any party for that. I'm blaming both parties for that. But the balance of power has shifted because the people responsible for legislating have failed to do it, or they have legislated in a way that only makes things more difficult and problematic.
Thank you. This next question we've just got, and I'm reading it. Should the federal government extend or withhold funding based on the way it perceives the performance of state and local entities? We'll start with you, Mr. Jordan.
Well, I think states need to be held accountable for their budgets and for their actions. So when you have jurisdictions that throw money at problems that they shouldn't be throwing money at, and then come back and say, oh, well, we don't have money for our priorities, give us some more money. No, fill your priorities first, and then if you have other money, go help the other people. Do that. because there are too many states right now, California, Illinois, I think New York, there's a couple others that are deep in debt, and they're at risk of defaulting because they have these huge government pension plans that keep paying out, and the tax base can't pay for it all. So they have themselves upside down, and now they want a bailout. I say no. If we're going to go in and bail them out, then we have to throw the people out that got them into that position. Get the politicians out that created those problems, and go in and reset and make sure that the economy can support the expenditures of the state before you come asking the federal government for money.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, I'll repeat the question for you. Should the federal government extend or withhold funding based on the way it perceives the performance of state and local entities?
I think that's a largely irrelevant question, because there are certainly things at the very margin where a state's performance does make sense. I can't think of a particular example, but you could imagine if there's a special fund for child support enforcement and a state's doing it really well, that they would earn more. And if they do it really poorly, why throw good money after bad? But in general, the vast majority of federal funding for states is done by formula, done by the number of people that are in the state, not by, and also by the state's needs, which is why those states that Jeff was just trashing, California, New York, Illinois, are states that overwhelmingly are sending more money to the federal government than they get back. These are states that are sending money to Mississippi, Alabama, Kansas, Montana. Those states are all net importers of money because they need it more. And the big states, the ones that supposedly have these problems, none of them are about to go bankrupt, by the way, are the ones that are out there funding the rest of the states. Virginia, too, a net contributor to other states. By the way, Jeff mentioned, why has the power shifted to the presidency? Well, Congress has failed, but not the House. You talk to your friends Paul Ryan and Boehner. They passed lots of laws and they died in the Senate. We've been passing lots of laws that died in the Senate. We have a Senate that's ever less representative of the American people. And it has a filibuster in a divided country where it's very difficult to get 60 votes.
Thank you. This question was also just come in. What do you feel about defunding the police?
I think that is a really cool fake term that some Republican made up. I don't know a single Democrat that wants to defund the police. Certainly nobody that I hang around with. I am very close to all 4 police chiefs in Northern Virginia, Arlington, Fairfax, Falls Church, and Alexandria. And I would never think about doing anything except supporting them ever more boldly. Now, do I think they need grenade launchers? No. Do I think they need tanks? No. The militarization, they would think, is ridiculous too. But ever more money to make sure that they're hiring the best people, that they're paying them as much as they can, that they have all the training, including the mental health training. I'm very proud of Alexandria that has 80 police officers who've been through the first aid mental health training that can help intervene when somebody's in a crisis, suicidal, a domestic violence thing. So no, absolutely not. And I think it's a great, campaign thing to say, let's accuse the other people of defunding the police, but it's garbage. We want to make sure that our police are supported. We also recognize that the vast majority, I know it's 95% or 98% of police, are wonderful men and women who protect us every day. We got a couple of bad ones, and we need to make sure that we weed them out and make sure they don't get rehired. But that means, and I would make sure that our police officers are paid what they're worth, which is an awful lot. And that doesn't mean defunding.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, will you take this question now?
Absolutely. So I go out every week to support the police in rallies around the district. And the police are loving it. They love the support. They appreciate it. They're pretty quiet about it, but they are. They'll come up and talk to us. And to say that there's nobody on the left that's calling to defund the police, I think it was Seattle has already done that. There are other cities and jurisdictions that are doing that. The BLM movement is designed to do that. So the idea that the people on the left aren't wanting to defund the police is laughable. That's exactly what they want to do. Now, we're fortunate here that, yes, we have good police officers, good police districts, but it will come here eventually. You know, the saying that just you know, I didn't speak up for that person or that person, then it came my turn, but there was nobody left to speak for me. We're headed down that road, and the police deserve our support across the board. It's about public safety. It's about personal safety, okay? Because there are people around this country right now that are terrorizing neighborhoods and cities, and they're coming from the left. So support the police and defend the rule of law.
Thank you. This question is kind of related to this. Do you believe that the federal law enforcement should be out defending federal buildings, for example, in Portland, Oregon?
Well, that's the purpose of the Federal Protective Service and other law enforcement agencies, is to protect federal property. So yes, that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. If there are people out there who seek to destroy that property, they should be held accountable at the federal level, period.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer?
Yeah, I have no problem with federal law enforcement protecting federal buildings. I think most governors would prefer that they have the opportunity to defend them first, and often governors will call in federal law enforcement when necessary. But if it's gotten out of control and the governor isn't doing it, you know, they're federal buildings with the federal law enforcement. My concern will be when the federal law enforcement gets outside of that jurisdiction and starts to do other things in town. And we have unfortunately seen some sad instances of that.
Thank you. And this next question will start with you, Mr. Beyer. How do we get money out of politics in order to have any real change?
Well, the first thing we do is pass H.R. 1, which is the very first bill that we did in the House this year. That wasn't perfect because it didn't reverse Citizens United. That was a Supreme Court decision. It's going to take a constitutional amendment. I would very much support a constitutional amendment to say that corporations aren't people and get rid of dark money as best we can. It is a pernicious thing that Democrats and Republicans at all levels have to spend far too much money raising money, far too much time raising money. And it's difficult not to make the argument that if a given industry, say fossil fuel, pours billions of dollars into a given set of people's campaigns, that is not going to affect how they vote. And that's probably true whether it's the right or the left. So I think changing the law, you know, by the way, John McCain was an enormous fan of trying to get the money out of politics. Mitch McConnell, sadly, has been the exact opposite. He thinks that there's never been a problem, that this is First Amendment, there should be more money than ever. But let's remember, the people that have the money to pour into politics are the richest people, and they don't represent the vast majority of Americans.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, how do we get money out of politics in order to have any real change?
Well, you have to change it from a power situation to a responsibility situation. And by that, I mean, you know, when you're in Congress and you are being lobbied and there's all this money and influence surrounding you to spend all these dollars, but there's no cap on the dollars. So let's live within our means, pass a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget, and spend within those means, and make sure that our taxes are limited. And I'm a flat tax guy, 10%. 10% sales, 10% income, and there's no other tax. And then Congress has to live within those means and figure it out. So then they have a responsibility to work together to spend that money. That's how you get them to work together. That's how you get fiscal responsibility in this country, and remove much of the outside influence and pressure on the congressional members.
Thank you. This brings us to the last question for the evening. And that will be addressed to you, Mr. Jordan. What are your thoughts on gerrymandering? Do you believe that district lines need to be redrawn?
I think the best thing that we could do to counter gerrymandering is work with the existing county boundaries and draw the lines along county boundaries and get them as close as possible to equal populations simply based on those boundaries. Don't be slicing and dicing neighborhoods and districts and counties. Simplify it. That way, when somebody moves into a county, they know, at least until the next census, that's the district they're going to be in. That's not going to be redrawn and their neighbors now in a different district. So to me, let's take the politics out of it. And then you wouldn't even have to have the commission that is being voted on right now to do that thing and take that away from the legislature here in Virginia. So to me, that's the simplest, most cost-effective, most fair, most equitable, most dependable approach to representation and drawing those districts.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, would you like to answer?
Well, I do very much. I think Jeff, I agree. We'd love to get rid of gerrymandering. It's unfair. If just county boundaries were enough, that would be very cool. But you can use county boundaries and still draw an infinite number of different districts, many of which are gerrymandered, which is why we need an independent commission. I intend to vote yes on the constitutional amendment, number one. Sadly, a number of my Democratic friends are opposing it. And they're worried that it's not a fully independent commission, because 8 people will be independent citizens and 4 will be Democrats, 4 will be Republicans. So there'll still be political input. It's not perfect. However, it's taken us decades and decades and decades to get this far. It may take us decades to once again get a bipartisan consensus on a constitutional amendment we can put before the people of Virginia. So my strong belief is that the perfect is the enemy of the good enough. And this constitutional amendment in Virginia will make gerrymandering much less of a problem than it's been. And by the way, this is true at the federal level too. You have Maryland, where they have 8 Democrats and 1 Republican, not fair. But then you also have Ohio, which has 12 Republicans and 4 Democrats, not fair. It cuts both ways. And if we can do that with as much independence and a much greater sense of fairness as we can. And by the way, if we can keep it within a whole county boundary, that's very simple and it would be a nice thing to do.
Thank you so much. I can't believe we got through so many questions, but so thank you for your wonderful answers. And the last part of our program is closing statements. Mr. Jordan, would you start first, please, with your closing statement? You have 2 minutes.
Oh, no, now I have 2 minutes. All right. First of all, thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you, Dawn, for being here. To all those who are watching from home, I appreciate you being here. Listen, this is the most important election of our time. This is a choice between up or down, not left or right. Which direction do you want to go? My belief is that come the 4th of November, there's going to be a fight, unfortunately. The question is, what side do you want the government to be on? Do you want to be on your side, or do you want to be against it? Or do you want it to be against you? Because that's where we're at this point. The rhetoric, the contention, the argument, the polarization, the discontent, the disenfranchisement, all of those things have brought us to this point. And what we need going forward are people that will look to the Constitution, defend it, protect it, and protect everything that it stands for, to include lives, which are even the unborn, liberty, which is everything that we are allowed to do here, because we're in danger of being a transactional or transnational country at this point. With, everybody's gone to this remote remote position to work and do business. And, once people figure out that, well, now I can outsource it to anywhere in the world because I can do it remote, well, there goes our standard of living. That it will undermine our economy. It will undermine our social contract. It will undermine our ability to be what America is today. So I ask for your vote on November 3rd. Actually, go vote now. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Beyer, a closing statement, please. 2 minutes.
Well, let me also add my thanks to the League of Women Voters for holding this forum. Anu, thank you for guiding Jeff and me through this hour and a half of questions. We're really grateful. And Nicole, good job on the time. I hope we didn't upset you. And I want to thank you for allowing me to serve all these years. I've had many leadership roles, but none with so many opportunities to lead and to be changed as serving in the people's house. And now we've got to protect those 30 million Americans with expired unemployment benefits, no jobs, no way to put food on the table. Help them get back on their feet so that they're working and contributing. We've got to help state and local governments close the $1.5 trillion drop in revenues they suffer because of the coronavirus. And especially in Northern Virginia, we've got to help our federal workers. I'll fight to restore the values of honor, integrity, truth, kindness, so abandoned and so destroyed by this administration. This is a fight for the soul of America, a fight that will determine our history for years to come. It's a fight for our environment. It's a fight against systemic racism. It's a fight against poverty. It's a fight for equal rights. I want to thank my friend Jeff Jordan for his many years of service in the Army and for joining this political fray. And I want to thank all of you. Please vote for me on November 3rd, but please, please stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of our candidate forum. We hope that the concerns and questions of our audience have been addressed and answered to their satisfaction. And thank you, Mr. Beyer and Mr. Jordan, for participating tonight. We invite you all to visit their campaign websites. If you still have questions that we could not get to, or if you have any follow-up questions for the candidates, please go to our website, lwv-fairfax.org, and look for candidate forums. You'll be able to submit questions there, and we will send them on to the candidates. Many election laws have changed this year, and we invite you to check out all the voter registration and election information on our website, as well as on vote411.org. Voting has already begun, and we ask you to go out and vote, whether you do it in absentee, early voting, or mail-in voting. So thank you very much, and good night.